Let's look at this example. Longest substring with at most k distinct characters. Given string s and an integer k, return the length of the longest substring of s that contains at most k distinct characters. So we actually just solved a problem that is longest substring with at most two distinct characters, right? So it's actually exactly the same, with only one difference of at most k or at most two. But I said, let's just go through that again. The substring is a contiguous non-empty sequence of a characters within the string, which means substring is different from subsequence, right? So it has to be consecutive, and it's not like a subsequence that we can choose the elements in an order, but it's not actually not the case. Okay, so let's look at example first. S ECEBA case 2. It appeared in the last example, right? So in the last problem that we just solved for at most two distinct characters. Yeah, the length is 3 and is 2, so ECE. And the second example, AA, so K is 1, which means it has to be at least one distinct character, so meaning all the characters are exactly the same for this substring. And AA is actually two exactly same letters, so together the length is 2, and AA is the longest substring that we can get. All right, so it's actually very similar to the last question we had. So in the beginning, as always, we need to import from collections, import default dict. The reason to do this is to make things easier for later part, because we probably need to handle the cases where, when we access the dictionary, then it is not initialized, meaning the count or the value is 0. So we would do more, you need to write more syntax to deal with that, but I don't really want to deal with that because it's a little bit more complicated and add more chance to get error. So that's why we need to do this default dict. But if you prefer that way, you can also do that way. All right, so in the beginning, we need to initialize something. First result is 0. It is something we do want to return at the end. And we also need left pointers, because this is a two-pointer problem. The left pointer is 0. The right pointers, we don't really need to initialize here because we'll do a for loop. And what else? We also need a char map, right? So char map is default dict with the value as integers. All right, so for right and what? Right and char in enumerate the s. So while we are exploring a new letters or characters, what we need to do is actually update the map. So char map of char should be plus equal to 1. And next is to check the left pointers, right? To check what's the condition, like is the current substring valid or not? So we need to check while the length of char map is greater than 2, meaning if that's the case, we need to move the left pointers. So okay, so while it's true, while the length of the char map is greater than 2, we need to do what? We need to move, right? So how should we move? First of all, we need to know what's the letter on the left parts, at the index of left, right? So left char is what? Char is actually char, no, as of left, because we are accessing the character directly from the string s. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we update the map because we want to move this. So left char minus equal to 1. Okay, after this, we want to check if we don't have any kind of characters, left char characters in these substring that we are currently maintaining. So if it's not in the current substring, we can just delete this. We don't really need this, and the length of the uh, char map is gonna be -1, so it's smaller, so that it can be maintainable. So if char map at left char is equal to 0, then we just delete the char map at left char. All right, so, but keep in mind, we need to update the left pointers, right? So for each iterations of the while loop, if if we need to move the left pointers, meaning if the current distinct characters, the number of current distinct characters is okay. Why I'm using 2? It's actually not correct. The really difference. Okay, actually I'll just keep it 2 because this is actually exactly what we had for the last LeetCode questions. Okay, let's just go forward, go into the next step, and I'll say what we need to change. So left plus equal to 1, and now after this, we'll compare, right? What is the max of the length? So right minus left plus 1. All right, so this is the code for the for loop, and lastly, we need to return the result. So this entire thing, the entire code, is exactly the same as the last question we just discussed for at most 2 distinct characters. But for this question, the only thing we need to change is k. Because there are 2 inputs here, s and k, right? For the last question we only have the one single input for which is s, the string. So for this question, we need to really look at the length. If it's greater than k, then if the yes, okay, we'll do updating these things. But if it's no, then we just we don't go to this while loop, and we don't really update the left pointers. So that's the only thing we need to change compared to the question we just solved. And let's test. Okay, accept, submit. All right, great. So what's the running time, right? So actually the running time is exactly the same asymptotically. So the running time for this entire thing is big O of n, and the running time, the space time is big O of 1. Thank you.